Okay, so now we have talked about the different types of omega-3 fatty acids, especially the EPA and the DHA. We have talked about the bioavailability of the different types of omega-3 fatty acids, so the ethyl ester form, the natural triglyceride form, and the reconstituted triglyceride form. We should now talk a little bit about the dose. What is your recommendation for the daily dose of these omega-3 fatty acids?
First of all, we are long-chain omega-3 deficient. We have a deficiency all over the Western world, maybe most pronounced in the US, but we have a deficiency. So what I would, and have done since many years, is recommend a daily dose of 1 to 2 grams. That can be done by eating 2 or 3 fatty fish meals per week. It can also be done by taking 2 or 3 capsules of whatever product, a decent product per day. That's in preventive and supplemental ways. But if you're looking at the therapeutic effect on special issues, for example, it's known that a high intake of long-chain omega-3 gives rise to production of anti-inflammatory compounds, which dampen inflammatory symptoms. And we and others, and many of us, have demonstrated in many experiments that, for example, rheumatoid arthritis, which is a terrible and long-lasting disease, can be dampened symptom-wise by a dose of long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, and triglycerides can be lowered with a dose of long-chain omega-3 fatty acids. And in that situation, it's not 1 to 2 grams, it's 4 to 5 grams a day. So prophylactic, preventive, 1 to 2 grams a day. Therapeutic, 4 to 5 grams a day. That's the doses we have at present.
Yes, I agree. If you look at the official recommendation by EFSA, for example, they recommend generally around 250 milligrams of EPA plus DHA per day. To be honest, I think that is very low.
As a nutrition, is too low.
Yeah. Let's go back a second to the omega-3 index. If somebody should measure his omega-3 index, what would be the optimum value for this?
Wow, over 8, yeah, more than 8. And a very few live up to that. Mine is 10 point something. But I have taken a supplement of fish oil since, actually since child, because my mother gave me each morning a spoonful of cod liver oil with sugar to eat World War. But that was not because my mother knew that omega-3s are good for your heart and your health. That was due to rickets prevention with vitamin D content of cod liver oil. But I've taken this stuff since childhood, and I'm about 10 in omega-3 index.
Is there actually a dose which can be too high of omega-3 fatty acids? So an overdose, which might be even dangerous for our body? Have you ever heard of something like that?
I haven't. I was once involved in the Danish Nutrition Society advising the government on that issue. And there was someone in the government that we better give a recommendation to the Danish population that you should not take more than 4 grams a day, because that was what he thought was a sober advice, and that was safe enough, and you shouldn't eat more than 4 grams. And I said, would that mean that the Danish government advised our Greenland population to stop eating? And then there was absolute silence in the room, because we had shown that their average intake was in the area of 20 to 25 grams a day. So to go down to 4, they had to stop eating. And the head of the council said, thank you for your input. We will come back to that another time. And they never came back. No, I don't think. Of course, you prolong your bleeding time, which can give some bleeding risk if you're up in that area. But then again, you lower your clotting risk, and Danes and Germans and Spaniards are not dying from bleeding. They're dying from clotting. So if you increase the bleeding risk and lower the clotting risk, you are lowering the major risk and increasing the minor risk. So yeah, I don't think there is an upper limit, but this is a difficult issue, because something that isn't biology is often involved in these types of discussions.
Right. Now, most people know omega-3 fatty acids for their positive effects on our cardiovascular system, right? For lowering triglycerides, for lowering blood pressure, for reducing the risk of a cardiovascular infarct, for example. But there are many, many more applications and indications for the use of omega-3 fatty acids, especially in the sense of preventing certain diseases. Now, where do you think, apart from the cardiovascular side, where do you think are the omega-3 fatty acids especially important for our health?
Yeah, there are many aspects. There are fatty acids, there are depression, there are mood, aggression, the coronary heart disease, there are inflammatory processes in the joints and in the teeth and the gums, parodontitis. But if I just should extract a major issue, that would, for me as an old professor in nutrition, be that there are data showing that mothers who has a low intake of omega-3 fatty acid during pregnancy and lactation, compared to mothers that have a higher or more correct or better intake of long-chain omega-3 during pregnancy and lactation, those with the low get babies with a cerebral function that is not as good as those with a higher intake. So sufficient intake of long-chain omega-3 during pregnancy and lactation ensures in some way a better outcome of brain function. At least there are solid data pointing at that in the newborn. And nothing to me could be more important. Nothing.
Yeah. Yes, you're right. In fact, this just reminds me of the discussions we had over here over Christmas with a friend of my daughter who's actually a vegetarian, a vegan person. And we discussed about the importance of DHA during pregnancy and also nursing, especially for the development also of the child, but also for the well-being of the mother. And this young lady, told me, well, what about all the people living in India, which are strictly since generations on a vegetarian diet? They're not necessarily all more, let's say, stupid than we are, right? And she's correct.
It's not true, because there have been several studies on the conversion rate from alpha-linolenic acid, which is in vegetables, in seeds, linseed, whatever, yeah. Linseed, of course, is the most. Alpha-linolenic acid has a very low conversion rate in people on an average diet up until EPA and even nearly zero to DHA. But a lot of studies shows that in vegans, the conversion rate is far higher. So
oh, really?
So the body adjusts. Yeah.
Yes, which would make sense, because if you consider DHA as being one of the essential building blocks of our brain, and our body doesn't get, let's say, this building block from our diet, well, he has to find other ways to create it. And what other ways does he have? Well, he has the biochemical pathway to elongate and include double bonds into the alpha-linolenic acid. I could imagine that indeed for people living a vegetarian diet, especially over generations, their body is more, let's say, prepared for the own synthesis of DHA than, for instance, people who are living on a normal Western diet.
And I've often heard mothers saying, oh, after my second child, I felt more and more stupid. I said, that's because you delivered your DHA in your brains to your babies. Yeah. I'm just exaggerating. But there is something in it. The baby is the number one. Mother is number two. Baby takes what it needs, all it can get from the mother, even if it, in a way, could harm the mother. So, yeah, it's essential to me. That's why I pointed at what is the most important area. It's very difficult. They're all important. But a very important area is to ensure that pregnant females and lactating females get enough of long-chain omega-3s to supply their child, their metabolism, because 70% of the newborn baby's metabolism is in their brains. 70%, yeah, of the daily energy conversion is brain related. Right.
Now,
okay.
So would you agree with the statement that in your early stage of life, so as a baby and as a child, you need more DHA, then as an adult, you need more EPA, and then as you turn older, your whole body needs again more DHA. Is that something you would agree to?
Nobody knows the exact amounts that are needed. You need them both. And I said, just get enough of both. And that means half a gram of each per day. That will be fine with me. To be an Eskimo and eat 15 grams per day. If you're living from fish, it's well.
It's an interesting study also that I read was when the Inuit people moved over to Denmark, well, the omega-3 concentration in the blood really went down. The whole story changed again, right? I mean, so it truly has something to do with the diet, isn't it?
Story changed. They were down at our level and even lower because they were often living on the poor condition. And we had a lot of issues, and alcohol was a major issue too. And but that is population studies. But they went down to our level, definitely.
Yes.
We measured it, yeah.
Okay. Now, Dr. Dyerberg, you were not only active in your professional life in the field of omega-3 fatty acids. In fact, you're also one of the most important scientific people or person working in the field of trans fatty acid. Isn't that correct?
Story where Denmark has been in the leading. We were in the leading with omega-3s because of our studies, and we have been leading in industrially produced trans fatty acids, also in part due to my work, but not only due because I was part of the National Nutrition Council. And back in the early 90s, there were some works, especially the Nurses' Health Study from America and the Physicians' Health Study, showing that a high intake of industrially produced trans fatty acids, which are part of margarine. Margarines, it makes margarine solid and stable and reasonable for cooking and producing cookies and whatever. But those with a high intake of EPA had a higher risk of coronary heart disease. We took it up in the Danish Nutrition Council in the very early 90s and advised the Danish government to legislate on that issue, suggesting that EPA, not EPA, we'll be talking about fatty acids, should not be in a higher amount than 2% of fat in foods. 2% of the fat in food. You see, in solid margarine at that time, it could be 60% of the margarine.
How much? 60? 60?
Oh, yeah. This, of course, was a major issue, and the Danish government discussed that and was advised, that's unfair against producers of margarine and other data solid enough. And we continued pressing. And finally, in 2003, the Danish government introduced that legislation. This was commented by the EU as saying that could be a case for the law to down-regulate, up-regulate that again, because that was unfair commercial regulations. But we stood fast in Denmark, and gradually over the next year, more and more countries came along, Switzerland, the US, and other countries, and now it spread, and finally the EU, loaded by now more and more data showing that there is a risk associated with a high intake of industrially produced trans fatty acids for coronary heart disease and also other diseases. And now even EU has turned around. And the issue is that we are seeing a fall in coronary heart disease frequency in the countries that lowered the trans fatty acid intake, leading simply because we started earlier. Yes. We're now in the forefront of reducing coronary heart disease risk, not only, of course, due to intake of lower intake of trans fatty acid, and not only due to a higher intake of omega-3, but also due to a decreased smoking incidence, and so on and so on. So a better nutrition, but this part has its effect.
Right. But I also believe nowadays most producers of margarine have actually reduced the amount of industrial trans fatty acids in their products, correct?
Right. That's significant. They even announced free of trans.
Okay, before we come to an end, I have one more question, Dr. Dyerberg, and that is, I was wondering, why do so many professional physicians, cardiologists, and other people working in the healthcare sector still have so big doubts about the efficacy of omega-3 fatty acids? If you talk to some of these people, in the best case, they come back to you and say something like, oh, it's just a fish oil. You might as well take it. It does no harm. Why is that? Why is it so complicated for the omega-3 fatty acid, where we have now more clinical studies proving their efficiency than, for instance, for aspirin? But still, they're not really recognized in the professional society. Why is that?
There are many reasons. First of all, educational-wise, doctors prefer medicine instead of food, instead of food supplements. They don't like. They like medicine. It's deep in them, educational-wise. And then again, there are issues because studies have not overall shown that if you give some omega-3 to persons with coronary heart disease risk, you get a lower coronary heart disease. Some studies, major studies, show that there's absolutely no effect. Others, that like the strength, other like the reduce it, show that you can lower it dramatically by 25%. So there are issues, but the problem is that as a drug, I guess, given in short-time studies to sick persons, there might not be a major effect, but taking day after day from fish or supplements, there is a protection which has been shown in many studies showing the relationship between omega-3 fatty acid intake and coronary heart disease risk. So during a long life period, there is a protection, and it's not possible to take that in what we call randomized clinical trials. But what we need to get out there is that there is a protection in lifelong intake of a decent amount of long-chain omega-3 polyunsaturated.
Unfortunately, our time is up. It was very, very interesting talking to you. And I would also like to thank you for, more than 50 years of active work in the field of omega-3 fatty acids and trans fatty acids and their implications and importance for our health. It was a pleasure talking to you, and all the very, very best to you.
Bye.